The Conservatives have placed all their chips on their leader. It's his face, touched up and blown up, that stares out of their campaign billboards. He's the solo star of many of their party political broadcasts. To many people, the Conservative Party seems to be no longer a party, but a cult of personality. It's almost North Korean Kim Jong-il Cameron.
Actually, one of the things I'm proudest of over the last 4 years is building a really strong team.
Why do we never see them? Why is it all me, David Cameron, David Cameron?
It isn't.
A small group around the leader make all the critical decisions.
Every leader has people around him who he trusts, who he works closely with. And David has a team, and I'm not a member of that team.
He's far from the only one who's not on the team.
Let's go have a meeting. Lots of members of the shadow cabinet feel excluded from the inner circle.
Do you actually make decisions in the shadow cabinet?
Not a lot.
Who would you name as the most sort of important and influential people around David Cameron?
Ed Llewellyn, his private secretary, Steve Hilton, his head of strategy.
A small band of men dedicated to reinventing a party and putting it back in power through the image of a young and telegenic leader. This sounds familiar.
The conclusions I reached about Mr. Cameron was that he had studied the New Labour handbook very, very assiduously.
Guy with a young family. There's an amazing parallel to Blair, and I witnessed both men coming to power in their parties at close quarters. They both really believe passionately in power and success, and winning power is the most important thing.
The greatest menace to David Cameron's project for power was the parliamentary expenses scandal.
There have been claims that put in a claim for moats being...
That is not correct.
Is that correct?
That is not correct.
The best materials that I can find, lead for the roofs, English oak.
Do you know what it's about? Jealousy. I've got a very, very large house. Some people say it looks like Balmoral. It's the photographs. The way they photograph looks like Balmoral. But it just does me nicely.
When we heard about Tory MPs claiming for cleaning their moats, duck islands and all the rest of it, this reinforced the image which the Labour Party would love to recreate of the Tories as the party of the uncaring rich, a collection of Sir Jaspers.
It caused, obviously, tensions within the parliamentary party because there is an inward-looking approach which says, you know, you look after your own.
The Tory leader had personally claimed large sums for a second home.
Has there sometimes been a bit of rough justice in that whole expenses business, whether at the hands of the media or of party leaders? Well, yes, there has.
Yet David Cameron hasn't sacked Michael Ashcroft, the billionaire from Belize and party deputy chairman, despite the huge embarrassment he's caused. They've finally been forced to admit that he's still claiming non-dom status to avoid paying tax in Britain on his massive overseas wealth. When you first met him, what was it that attracted you to the billionaire Michael Ashcroft?
If David Cameron becomes Prime Minister, in one sense there will be nothing new at all about that. One school has provided Britain with more Prime Ministers than any other. Some have been impressive, some dreadful. He will be the 19th Old Etonian to occupy number 10.
A large number of the shadow cabinet are from public schools, and there must be some public worry that the priorities of David Cameron and his colleagues are not necessarily the priorities of less well-off people in the country.
Are you embarrassed that you went to Eton?
No, not at all.
He chose to become a member of the Bullingdon Club at Oxford, which was hardly well known for its sort of sense of social responsibility and concern about the wider welfare of the country or the world.
The point made by Peter Mandelson in Peter's normal feline way is that David Cameron did make the choice to join the Bullingdon Club. The Conservative responses to the recession and the financial crisis that triggered it have tested their claims to economic competence. Some experts believe it is a test they're struggling to pass. The first big judgment call came when the mortgage bank Northern Rock imploded. The government took the stricken bank into public ownership. The Tories' instant reaction was to denounce the rescue.
Well, after months of dither and delay, we've ended up with this catastrophic decision to return to nationalisation.
George Osborne described it as the politics of Fidel Castro. But just 8 months later, much bigger banks were on the brink of collapse, and the Tories were forced to rethink their opposition to bailouts by the state.
This is exactly what happened in 1937. This is the Great Depression, and what happens is that you think everything's fine and you tighten too soon. Any attempt to cut public spending anytime soon certainly has the great likelihood it will generate a double dip.
For a while, the Tories made a boast about how fiercely they were going to cut spending. They told the country to prepare for an age of austerity. But then their position in the polls began to weaken. The message was not playing well with swing voters.
Very few governments around the world have ever won an election based upon a budget of austerity. If you're going to put a message of austerity, people are going to realise that there's going to be unemployment. And not just unemployment in general, particularly unemployment of young people.
Worried by those weakening polls, during a visit to the Davos summit, David Cameron dramatically softened his tone. Suddenly, or so it seemed, Tory cuts were not going to be so draconian after all. Isn't the truth that you all got a bit panicked? You talked about age of austerity. Suddenly, the polls didn't look so good. You, certainly David Cameron, got into a panic and went out and said, oh, no, they won't. The George was exaggerating maybe a bit when he talked about these drastic cuts that were coming.
This is complete rubbish. I mean,
how else do you explain this difference and contradiction of messages?
Well, first of all, we have not changed the policy.
David Cameron and George Osborne are old friends who've been the closest of collaborators in steering the Tory party towards victory.
He's brilliant.
In government, it's inevitable that there will be the most acute tensions in their relationship. Most prime ministers fall out with their chancellors sooner or later. That friendship is likely to be tested to breaking point. You and David Cameron are famously good friends. How are you going to stop your relationship going the same way as that between Tony Blair and Gordon Brown?
First of all, I'm not sure that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown ever fundamentally liked each other. I mean, they were political allies, whereas David and I are good personal friends. Second, Gordon Brown wanted to be the party leader.
George Osborne will have an eye, no doubt, on his own political future, and to that extent, they will be rivals as well as colleagues.
The San Andreas fault of British politics runs right between number 10 and number 11. That is where governments fracture.
The most common causes of earthquakes in Downing Street are tax and spending. The Conservatives are committed to massive reductions to the budgets of the police, education and transport. It's surely not credible that this can be achieved without hurting frontline services. And when it's suggested, as it is sometimes by politicians, that you can have the public spending reductions being envisaged and not in any way affect frontline services, is that believable?
I don't think it's believable. Very difficult to that this is done solely by efficiency, back office systems and so on.